A trembling waitress crashed the Sheikh Billionaire's wedding. One whispered word made the bride run. The Grand Celestial Hotel stood like a gleaming tower of glass and gold in the heart of Manhattan, its crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors that had witnessed countless moments of luxury and power. Tonight, it would witness something far more dramatic. Emma Carter's hands trembled as she balanced the silver tray of champagne flutes, her reflection catching in the polished surface. 26 years old, with chestnut hair pulled back in a tight bun and hazel eyes that had learned to avoid direct contact, she moved through the opulent ballroom like a ghost. Her black and white uniform was crisp and anonymous, designed to make her invisible to the wealthy guests who filled the space. That invisibility had become her armor over the past 3 years, a shield against a world that had once known her as something entirely different. The ballroom had been transformed into a paradise of white roses and golden accents. Thousands of flowers cascaded from towering arrangements, their perfume mixing with expensive colognes, and the subtle scent of money that seemed to permeate every corner of the room. Crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes hung overhead, their light dancing across the faces of politicians, celebrities, and business magnates from across the globe. This was the wedding of the year, perhaps the decade. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid, one of the world's wealthiest men, was marrying Vanessa Beaumont, a French socialite whose beauty and grace had captivated international society. Emma had tried to call in sick that morning. She had begged her supervisor to assign her to any other event, any other floor, anywhere but here. But the Grand Celestial was short-staffed, and the wedding required every available hand. So here she stood, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird, knowing what she knew, carrying a secret that weighed more than any tray she had ever balanced. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid entered the ballroom with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. At 48, he was striking rather than handsome, with sharp features, intense dark eyes, and a perfectly trimmed beard that was just beginning to show threads of silver. He wore a traditional white thobe of the finest silk, a black and gold bisht draped over his shoulders like a cape of authority, and a pristine white gutra held in place by a golden agle. His presence commanded attention without effort. People parted before him instinctively, their conversations pausing as he passed. He moved with the certainty of someone who owned not just companies and oil fields, but the very air around him. Emma watched him from her position near the service entrance, her stomach twisting. She had served him twice during the wedding preparations over the past week. Both times he had looked through her as if she were furniture. When she had refilled his water glass, he had continued his phone conversation in Arabic without acknowledgement. When she had cleared his table, he had gestured dismissively for her to hurry. To Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid, she was nothing, less than nothing. Just another faceless servant in a world that existed to cater to his needs, but what she knew could destroy him. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's Canon in D, and the guests rose to their feet. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The massive double doors at the end of the ballroom opened, and Vanessa Beaumont appeared. She was breathtaking. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of French couture, ivory silk that seemed to glow in the chandelier light, with delicate lace sleeves and a train that stretched behind her like a river of moonlight. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo, crowned with a diamond tiara that had once belonged to a Russian duchess. Her makeup was flawless, her smile radiant. She looked like every fairy tale princess ever imagined. Walking slowly down the aisle, scattered with white rose petals, her eyes fixed on the man waiting for her at the altar. Emma's hands clenched around her empty tray, because she knew the truth. That woman was not Vanessa Beaumont. That woman was Vera Morozova, and Emma had spent 6 months of her previous life trying to bring her to justice. 3 years ago, Emma Carter had been a different person. She had graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Law School, specializing in international matrimonial law. Her master's thesis had been groundbreaking, a comprehensive analysis of marriage fraud schemes targeting wealthy individuals, complete with case studies, legal precedents from multiple countries, and proposed international frameworks for prosecution. She had been brilliant, ambitious, and engaged to Marcus Ashford, a fellow attorney she had met during her second year of law school. They had been the perfect couple, or so she had thought. They had planned to open their own practice together, specializing in high-net-worth divorce and fraud cases. Then Marcus had stolen her thesis. He had taken her research, her analysis, her words, and published it under his own name while she was visiting her sick mother in Boston. By the time Emma discovered the theft, Marcus had already presented it at an international legal conference in Geneva. He had received accolades, job offers, and a position at Sterling and Whitmore, one of the most prestigious law firms in New York. When Emma confronted him, he had laughed. He had actually laughed and told her that no one would believe her, that he had connections and she had nothing, that she should be grateful he had ever paid attention to someone as ordinary as her. She had tried to fight. She had filed complaints, contacted the university, reached out to legal ethics boards. But Marcus had been thorough. He had manipulated dates, forged documents, and convinced their mutual colleagues that Emma was having a breakdown, that she was jealous of his success, that she was fabricating accusations because he had ended their engagement. The legal community was small and insular. Marcus had charm and connections. Emma had only her word, and her word was not enough. Within 6 months, her reputation was destroyed. Law firms that had been courting her suddenly stopped returning her calls. Her complaints were dismissed. The university, not wanting scandal, quietly suggested she withdraw from the program. She had lost everything: her career, her fiancé, her future, her sense of self. She had disappeared into the anonymous masses of New York City, taking a job as a waitress because it required no references, no background checks, no questions about her past. But she had never forgotten Vera Morozova. During her time as a law student, Emma had worked on a case involving a wealthy Swiss banker who had been defrauded by a woman claiming to be a French aristocrat. The woman had married him, secured a generous prenuptial agreement with carefully hidden loopholes, and divorced him 18 months later, walking away with $45 million. By the time the banker realized he had been conned, the woman had vanished. Emma had tracked her through 3 other similar cases: a German industrialist, a Monaco real estate developer, and a British tech entrepreneur. Each time the woman had used a different name, a different background story, but the pattern was identical. Marry wealthy men, exploit legal loopholes, disappear with millions. Emma had compiled a comprehensive file on her, including photographs, aliases, and known associates. She had been close to presenting her findings to Interpol when Marcus had destroyed her life. The file had been in her apartment, and in her devastation, she had packed it away in a box and tried to forget it existed. Until tonight. Until she had seen Vanessa Beaumont's face during the rehearsal dinner and recognized Vera Morozova, the ceremony began. The officiant, a distinguished man with silver hair and a voice that carried authority, stood between Sheikh Khalid and Vanessa. The sheikh looked proud, almost smug, as if he were acquiring a particularly valuable asset. Vanessa looked serene, her smile perfect, her hand resting lightly on Khalid's arm. They looked like the ideal couple, the union of old money and new power, European elegance and Middle Eastern wealth. Emma stood frozen near the back of the ballroom, her mind racing. She had spent the past 3 days in agony, debating what to do. Part of her wanted to stay silent, to remain invisible, to protect herself from the inevitable consequences of speaking up. She had learned the hard way that truth did not always triumph, that the powerful could crush the powerless without consequence. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid was one of the most powerful men in the world. If she accused his bride of fraud and was wrong, or if he simply chose not to believe her, she would be destroyed again. She would lose her job, possibly face legal action, certainly face his wrath. But if she stayed silent, she would be complicit. She would watch a good man, arrogant though he might be, walk into a trap that would cost him not just money, but dignity and trust. And she would prove that Marcus had been right about her, that she was ordinary, that she was a coward, that she would let injustice happen rather than risk herself. The officiant's voice rang out across the ballroom. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid and Vanessa Beaumont in holy matrimony. This is a sacred bond, a commitment before God and these witnesses to love, honor, and cherish one another for all the days of their lives." Emma's heart hammered so hard, she thought it might burst through her chest. Her hands were shaking so violently that she had to set down her tray before she dropped it. A supervisor glanced at her with concern, but Emma barely noticed. All her attention was fixed on the couple at the altar, on the woman who was about to commit fraud on an international scale, on the man who had no idea he was being played. The officiant continued through the traditional vows. Khalid's responses were firm and confident. Vanessa's were soft and demure, perfectly performed. They exchanged rings, platinum bands encrusted with diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. The moment was approaching. The final moment. The point of no return. If any person here present knows of any lawful impediment to this marriage, the officiant intoned, his voice solemn, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The traditional pause followed. It was meant to be rhetorical, a formality that no one ever actually interrupted. The guests waited in respectful silence for the ceremony to continue. Emma's feet moved before her mind fully registered the decision. She stepped forward from her position near the wall, her legs trembling, her breath coming in short gasps. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. A guest near the aisle noticed her movement and frowned. Another turned to look. A murmur began to ripple through the crowd. Wait, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, choked with fear and adrenaline. The officiant paused, looking confused. Sheikh Khalid turned, his expression darkening with annoyance. Vanessa's perfect smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Wait, Emma said again, louder this time, her voice cracking but carrying across the ballroom. You can't marry her. She's not who she says she is. The ballroom erupted. Gasps of shock, exclamations of outrage, the scraping of chairs as people stood to see better. 2 security guards in dark suits immediately began moving toward Emma from different directions. Sheikh Khalid's face transformed from annoyance to fury, his dark eyes blazing with an anger that would have made Emma flee if she had not already committed herself. How dare you? Khalid's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, sharp and cold. Remove this woman immediately. But Emma was already moving forward, pushing past guests who tried to block her path, her eyes locked on Vanessa. The bride had gone very still, her face carefully neutral. But Emma could see the calculation in her eyes, the rapid assessment of threat and escape routes. Her name is not Vanessa Beaumont, Emma shouted, her voice stronger now, fueled by 3 years of suppressed rage and pain. Her name is Vera Morozova. She's a con artist. She's done this before, at least 4 times that I know of. She marries wealthy men, exploits loopholes in prenuptial agreements, and disappears with millions. The security guards reached Emma, their hands closing on her arms. But she had one more card to play, one more piece of information that would prove she was not just a delusional waitress seeking attention. Emma locked eyes with the bride and spoke a single word in Russian, a language she had learned during her legal studies, a language she knew Vera Morozova spoke fluently. Vera, the effect was instantaneous and devastating. Vanessa Beaumont's carefully constructed mask shattered. Her face went white, her eyes widened with pure terror, and for one unguarded moment she looked exactly like what she was, a criminal who had just been exposed. She took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat, her breath coming in visible gasps. Vera Morozova, Emma repeated, louder, in Russian. I know who you are. I know what you've done. I have the files. I have the evidence. Vanessa, or Vera, made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Then she turned and ran. Her expensive heels clattered on the marble floor as she gathered her train in both hands and fled toward the side exit, her tiara slipping from her hair and falling to the ground with a crystalline crash. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Guests shouted, cameras flashed, security guards abandoned Emma to chase after the fleeing bride. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow louder than the music had been. Sheikh Khalid stood frozen at the altar, his face a mask of shock and humiliation. For a moment he looked lost, a powerful man suddenly stripped of his certainty. Then his eyes found Emma, and the fury that blazed there was terrifying. Seize her, he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. Do not let her leave this building. The security guards grabbed Emma's arms again, their grips painful this time. Emma did not resist. She had done what she came to do. Whatever happened next, she had told the truth. She had spoken up. She had not been a coward. As the guards dragged her toward a side room, Emma caught one last glimpse of Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid. He was staring after his vanished bride, his hands clenched into fists, his entire body rigid with rage and betrayal. In that moment, Emma felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. She knew exactly how he felt. She knew what it was like to trust someone completely and discover that trust had been weaponized against you. But she also knew that, unlike her, Sheikh Khalid had the power and resources to find the truth. And she had just given him the first piece of that truth, whether he was ready to hear it or not. The security room was small and windowless, with concrete walls and a single metal table bolted to the floor. Emma sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling, while two security guards stood by the door, and a third man, who had introduced himself as the hotel's head of security, paced back and forth, speaking rapidly into his phone. Emma had been in the room for 20 minutes. No one had told her what was happening. No one had explained what would happen to her. She assumed the police had been called. She assumed she would be arrested, possibly charged with disturbing the peace or trespassing, or whatever legal term applied to interrupting a billionaire's wedding. She had known this was a possibility when she made her decision, and she had accepted it. What she had not expected was for Sheikh Khalid himself to enter the room. He swept in like a storm, his bisht billowing behind him, his face carved from stone. The security guards immediately straightened, and the head of security ended his phone call mid-sentence. Khalid's presence filled the small room, making it feel even smaller, the air pressure seeming to increase with his anger. "Leave us," Khalid commanded without looking at the security personnel. "Sir, I don't think that's advisable," the head of security began. "This woman could be dangerous. She could be—" "I said leave us." Khalid's voice dropped to a tone that brooked no argument. "Wait outside. If I need you, I will call." The three men exchanged glances but obeyed, filing out and closing the door behind them. Emma was alone with Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid, and the full weight of his fury was now focused entirely on her. He stood across the table from her, not sitting, his hands braced on the metal surface, leaning forward in a posture of intimidation. Up close, Emma could see the fine lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the barely controlled rage in every line of his body. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And you will tell me the truth, or I will ensure you regret this day for the rest of your life." Emma met his eyes, forcing herself not to look away despite every instinct screaming at her to submit, to apologize, to make herself small. "My name is Emma Carter. I'm a waitress here at the hotel." "A waitress?" Khalid's voice dripped with contempt. "A waitress who speaks Russian? A waitress who makes accusations of international fraud at my wedding? A waitress who somehow knows my bride's supposed real name? Do you expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," Emma said quietly. "But it's the truth. I am a waitress." "But I wasn't always." "Then what were you?" Khalid straightened slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you really?" Emma took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she would have to expose her own past, her own failures, her own humiliation. But if she wanted Khalid to believe her about Vera, she would have to give him the truth about herself first. 3 years ago, I was a law student at Columbia. I specialized in international matrimonial law and fraud cases. I was working on my master's thesis about marriage fraud schemes targeting wealthy individuals. As part of my research, I investigated several cases of a woman who used different identities to marry and defraud rich men across Europe. I compiled a comprehensive file on her, including photographs, aliases, and patterns. That woman was Vera Morozova. "And the woman you were about to marry is her." Khalid stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You expect me to believe that a law student from Columbia is now working as a waitress? What happened? Did you fail out?" The words stung, but Emma had expected them. "No, I didn't fail. My fiancé stole my thesis and published it as his own work. When I tried to expose him, he destroyed my reputation. No one believed me. I lost everything, my career, my credibility, my future. So yes, I became a waitress, because it was the only job I could get that didn't require references or background checks." Something flickered in Khalid's eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but perhaps recognition. He knew what betrayal felt like now. He had just experienced it himself. "Even if what you say is true," Khalid said slowly, "even if you were a law student and you did research this woman, why should I believe your accusations? My bride, Vanessa, comes from an impeccable family. I had her background thoroughly investigated. She has documentation, references, a complete history. All forged, Emma said. Vera Morozova is an expert at creating false identities. She has connections to document forgers, identity specialists, people who can create an entire life history that will pass most background checks. But I can prove what I'm saying. I still have my research files. I have photographs of her from her previous marriages under different names. I have documentation of the fraud cases. I have everything. Where? Khalid demanded. Where are these files? In my apartment, in a storage box. I can take you there right now. Khalid studied her for another long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. Emma held his gaze, letting him look, letting him see that she was telling the truth. She had nothing left to lose. She had already lost everything once. If he chose not to believe her, if he had her arrested, it would simply be another chapter in her ongoing destruction. Finally, Khalid straightened and pulled out his phone. He made a call, speaking rapidly in Arabic. Emma caught only a few words, but she understood the tone. Commands, arrangements, mobilization of resources. When he ended the call, he looked at her again. You will take me to your apartment. You will show me these files. If you are lying, if this is some elaborate scheme for attention or money or revenge, I will have you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I will ensure you never work again anywhere. Do you understand? I understand, Emma said. And I'm not lying. We shall see. Khalid moved to the door and opened it, speaking to the security guards outside. Bring the car around. We're leaving, and find out where Vanessa went. I want her located immediately. 20 minutes later, Emma found herself in the back of a black Mercedes S-Class, sitting as far from Sheikh Khalid as the spacious interior allowed. A driver and a bodyguard occupied the front seats. Another SUV with additional security followed behind them. Emma gave her address, a modest apartment building in Queens, and the convoy began moving through the Manhattan streets. The silence in the car was oppressive. Khalid stared out the window, his jaw clenched, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Emma could feel the anger radiating from him like heat. She wanted to say something, to explain, to apologize for ruining his wedding. But she knew anything she said would only make things worse, so she stayed silent and watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up building that had seen better days. The contrast between the luxury Mercedes and the peeling paint of her building's entrance could not have been more stark. Khalid's bodyguard insisted on entering first, checking the apartment for threats, which would have been laughable if the situation were not so tense. Emma's studio apartment was barely 400 square feet, with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a single room that served as bedroom, living room, and office. There was nowhere to hide a threat, unless you counted the cockroaches. Khalid entered after his bodyguard gave the all-clear, and Emma watched his eyes take in her living space. The second-hand furniture, the books stacked on every available surface, the single window that looked out onto a brick wall. This was her life now. This was what she had been reduced to. The files are in the closet, Emma said quietly, moving to the narrow door beside her bed. She pulled out a cardboard box labeled Columbia in faded marker and set it on her small table. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside were the remnants of her previous life, her law school diploma still in its frame, notebooks filled with her handwriting, printed articles and case studies, and at the bottom a thick manila folder labeled Morozova Investigation. Emma pulled out the folder and opened it. Photographs spilled across the table. Vera Morozova in various guises, as Isabelle Dubois at a charity gala in Monaco, as Katerina Volkov at a wedding in Switzerland, as Victoria Beauchamp at a polo match in England. Different hair colors, different styles, but the same face. The same woman who had been standing at the altar tonight as Vanessa Beaumont. Khalid leaned over the table, his eyes scanning the photographs. Emma watched his face as recognition dawned, as the pieces fell into place. She pulled out more documents, newspaper articles about wealthy men who had been defrauded, legal filings, investigation reports she had obtained through her university connections. This is her, Khalid said finally, his voice hollow. He picked up a photograph of Vera as Katerina Volkov, standing beside a Swiss banker at their wedding. "This is Vanessa. The face is the same." "Yes," Emma said. "She's very good at changing her appearance, but the bone structure is identical." I recognized her immediately at the rehearsal dinner. Khalid sank into Emma's single chair, the only one in the apartment, looking suddenly exhausted. The arrogance had drained from him, replaced by a weariness that made him look older. "I had her investigated. I hired the best firm in New York. They found nothing suspicious." "She's been doing this for at least a decade," Emma explained. "She knows how to create identities that will pass standard background checks. She probably has legitimate documents, legitimate references, all carefully constructed. The only way to catch her is to know her pattern, to recognize her face from previous frauds. And you recognized her." Khalid looked up at Emma, and for the first time there was no contempt in his eyes. "You risked everything to warn me." "Why?" Emma hesitated. It was a good question. Why had she risked everything? She could have stayed silent, kept her job, avoided this entire disaster. But she knew the answer. "Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trust," she said quietly. "I know what it's like to have your life destroyed by someone who saw you as nothing more than a mark, a means to an end. I couldn't watch it happen to someone else, even someone I don't know, even someone who would never have noticed I existed. It wasn't right." Khalid studied her for a long moment, and Emma saw something shift in his expression, respect perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who had been wounded by betrayal. "Tell me about your fiancée," Khalid said. "The one who stole your work," so Emma told him. She told him about Marcus Ashford, about their relationship, about the theft of her thesis and the systematic destruction of her reputation. She told him about the complaints that went nowhere, the colleagues who stopped returning her calls, the university that quietly pushed her out rather than deal with scandal. She told him about the past 3 years of anonymity and survival, of serving tables and avoiding anything that might draw attention to her existence. When she finished, Khalid was silent for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and made another call, speaking in English this time. "I need a complete investigation of Marcus Ashford, attorney at Sterling and Whitmore. I want everything. His cases, his publications, his finances, his communications. I want to know if he has any connection to Vanessa Beaumont or any of her known aliases. And I want it by tomorrow morning." He paused, listening. "I don't care what it costs. Do it." He ended the call and looked at Emma. "If what you say about this man is true, if he stole your work and destroyed your career, then he will face consequences. I promise you that." Emma felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "Why would you help me?" "Because you helped me," Khalid said simply. "Because you risked everything to tell me the truth, when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Because I understand now that you are not a waitress. You are an attorney who was wronged, and that wrong will be righted." He stood, his presence filling the small apartment. "I need to find Vanessa or Vera or whatever her real name is. I need to understand the full extent of this fraud. And I need your help. You know her patterns, her methods. You have expertise that I need. I'll help however I can," Emma said. "But I should warn you, she's probably already gone. She's an expert at disappearing. Once she knew she was exposed, she would have had an escape plan ready." "Then we will find her," Khalid said with absolute certainty. "I have resources she cannot imagine, and I have you, someone who understands how she thinks." He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Pack a bag. You're coming with me. I'm not leaving you here alone. If Vanessa has accomplices, if she realizes you're the one who exposed her, you could be in danger." "I can't just leave," Emma protested. "I have work tomorrow. You no longer work at the hotel," Khalid interrupted. "As of tonight, you work for me. Your job is to help me understand this fraud and bring Vanessa to justice. I will pay you $10,000 a week for your expertise and your time. And when this is over, we will discuss your future. But right now you need to pack a bag and come with me." Emma stared at him, unable to process what was happening. 12 hours ago, she had been an invisible waitress. Now she was being hired by a billionaire to investigate international fraud. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment, but it was real. And for the first time in 3 years, Emma felt something she had thought was dead: hope. She packed quickly, throwing clothes and toiletries into a worn duffel bag. She grabbed her laptop, her files on Vera, and the few possessions that mattered to her. Within 15 minutes, She was following Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid out of her apartment and back into the Mercedes, her old life left behind in a 400-square-foot studio, her new life uncertain but suddenly full of possibility. As the car pulled away from her building, Emma looked back once. Then she turned forward, toward whatever came next, and did not look back again. Sheikh Khalid's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a luxury building overlooking Central Park. Emma had served at events in expensive homes before, but nothing had prepared her for this level of wealth. The elevator opened directly into the apartment, revealing a space of soaring ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and furnishings that belonged in a museum. Modern art hung on the walls, pieces Emma recognized from her college art history classes. A Rothko, a Basquiat, originals worth millions. A staff member, an older woman with kind eyes and a British accent, appeared immediately. "Mr. al-Rashid, I heard about the wedding. I'm so sorry. Is there anything you need?" "Prepare the guest suite for Miss Carter," Khalid said. "She'll be staying here for the foreseeable future, and have coffee and food sent to my office. We have work to do." The woman, who introduced herself as Margaret, led Emma to a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed dominated the space, dressed in linens that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. The attached bathroom had heated marble floors and a shower that could fit 6 people. Emma set down her shabby duffel bag on the pristine floor and felt like an imposter. "I'll bring you some clothes," Margaret said gently, as if reading Emma's thoughts. "You're about the same size as Mr. al-Rashid's sister. She keeps a wardrobe here for when she visits. I'm sure she wouldn't mind you borrowing a few things." "Thank you," Emma managed, overwhelmed by the kindness. 20 minutes later, showered and dressed in borrowed clothes that fit surprisingly well, Emma made her way to Khalid's office. She found him at a massive desk, still wearing his wedding thobe but with the bish discarded, his gutra removed to reveal thick, dark hair. He was on the phone, speaking in rapid Arabic, his free hand gesturing sharply. When he saw Emma, he gestured for her to sit. The office was lined with bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. A wall of windows showed the glittering expanse of Manhattan at night. On the desk were multiple computer monitors, all displaying different information. Khalid ended his call and turned his attention to Emma. "My security team has located Vanessa's apartment. She's gone. The apartment has been cleared out completely, as if she was never there. Her phone is disconnected. Her credit cards have not been used. She has vanished." "That's her pattern," Emma said. "She always has an exit strategy. She probably has multiple passports, multiple identities and cash reserves hidden in various locations. She's done this before. But she's never been exposed before," Khalid countered. "Not publicly, not at the moment of the crime. That changes things. She's running scared now. She'll make mistakes." Emma nodded slowly. "You're right. And there's something else. She didn't do this alone. She never does. She always has accomplices, document forgers, financial advisors who help her hide money, sometimes lawyers who help her exploit legal loopholes." "Lawyers," Khalid repeated, his eyes sharpening. "Like your ex-fiancée?" "Maybe," Emma said. "Marcus specializes in high-net-worth divorce cases. If Vera needed someone to create a prenuptial agreement with hidden vulnerabilities, someone who could make it look legitimate, while building in ways for her to claim a massive settlement, Marcus would be perfect." Khalid pulled up something on one of his monitors and turned it to face Emma. It was a photograph of Marcus Ashford, taken from his law firm's website. He looked exactly as Emma remembered, handsome in a conventional way with styled blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that had once made her heart race, but now made her stomach turn. "Is this him?" Khalid asked. "Yes," Emma said quietly. "That's Marcus. He's the attorney who drafted my prenuptial agreement with Vanessa," Khalid said, his voice deadly calm. "She recommended him. She said he was the best in the business, that he had handled agreements for several of her friends. I should have questioned that. I should have used my own attorney. But I was—" He trailed off, his jaw clenching. "You were in love," Emma finished gently. "Or you thought you were. That's what she does. She makes you believe in the fairy tale so completely that you don't question the details." "I was a fool," Khalid said bitterly. "I pride myself on my business acumen, my ability to read people, my strategic thinking. And I was played like a complete amateur." "She's a professional," Emma said. This is what she does. You're not the first brilliant, successful man she's fooled, and if we don't stop her, you won't be the last. Khalid looked at her, and Emma saw a new determination in his eyes. Then we stop her. And we stop your Marcus Ashford as well. If they're working together, we expose them both. Over the next several hours, Emma and Khalid worked through the files, building a timeline of Vera's known frauds. Emma explained each case. The Swiss banker who lost 45 million, the German industrialist who lost 32 million, the Monaco developer who lost 58 million, the British entrepreneur who lost 27 million. In each case, the pattern was the same. Vera would meet the target at a social event, cultivate a romance, present herself as the perfect partner, marry quickly, and then exploit carefully crafted loopholes in the prenuptial agreement to claim an enormous settlement in the divorce. The key is the prenuptial agreement, Emma explained. It looks solid on the surface, but there are always hidden vulnerabilities, clauses that can be interpreted multiple ways, definitions that are deliberately vague, triggers that seem reasonable but can be manipulated. A good attorney can find them if they know what to look for. And Marcus Ashford knows what to look for because he creates them, Khalid said grimly. He pulled up the prenuptial agreement he had signed with Vanessa, a document of over 60 pages. Show me. Show me where the traps are. Emma read through the document, her legal training coming back to her like muscle memory. It took her less than 20 minutes to find the first major vulnerability. Here, she said, pointing to a clause on page 17. This section defines marital misconduct as grounds for modifying the financial settlement. But look at how broadly it's defined. It includes emotional neglect, failure to maintain the lifestyle promised during courtship, and breach of verbal agreements made prior to marriage. Those are incredibly subjective terms. A good attorney could argue that almost anything constitutes marital misconduct under these definitions. Khalid leaned over her shoulder, reading the clause. And if I'm found guilty of marital misconduct, the settlement increases from 5 million to 50 million. Exactly, Emma said. And here on page 23 there's another trap. This clause says that if the marriage ends within the first 2 years, for any reason other than your documented infidelity, she's entitled to 20% of any business ventures initiated during the engagement period. When did you get engaged? 14 months ago, Khalid said, his voice tight. And have you started any new business ventures since then? 3. Including a joint venture with a Saudi petroleum company worth approximately $200 million. Emma did the math quickly. 20% of that would be $40 million. Combined with the marital misconduct clause, she could have walked away with $90 million or more. Khalid slammed his hand on the desk, making Emma jump. And I would have paid it. I would have paid anything to end the marriage quietly, to avoid scandal, to protect my reputation. That's what she was counting on. Yes, Emma said. That's exactly what she was counting on. She's done this before. She knows how men like you think. You value your privacy, your reputation, your image. You would pay enormous sums to avoid public embarrassment. Not anymore, Khalid said coldly. Now I want public exposure. I want everyone to know what she is, what she tried to do. I want her face on every news channel, every website, every newspaper. I want her to have nowhere to hide. That's risky, Emma warned. It means exposing yourself, admitting you were fooled. Your competitors will use it against you. The media will have a field day. I don't care, Khalid said. I have been arrogant. I have been blind. But I am not a coward. If exposing my own foolishness is the price of bringing her to justice, I will pay it gladly. Emma felt a surge of respect for him. This was not the arrogant billionaire who had looked through her at the hotel. This was a man who had been humbled and was choosing honor over pride. Then we'll need more evidence, Emma said. We need to prove the connection between Vera and Marcus. We need to show that this was a coordinated fraud, not just a bad prenuptial agreement. We need communications, financial records, anything that links them together. My investigators are already working on it, Khalid said. By morning, we'll have Marcus Ashford's complete digital footprint. Every email, every phone call, every financial transaction. If there's a connection, we'll find it. Margaret appeared with coffee and sandwiches, which Emma realized she desperately needed. She hadn't eaten since before the wedding, and it was now past midnight. As they ate, Khalid asked Emma more about her background, her education, her research. He listened intently, asking sharp questions, treating her like the expert she was rather than the waitress she had become. "You should never have lost your career," Khalid said finally. "What Marcus Ashford did to you was criminal. Intellectual property theft, fraud, defamation. He should have been prosecuted." "Should have been," Emma agreed. "But he had connections and I didn't. That's how the world works." "That's how the world worked," Khalid corrected. "But it's about to change, for both of us." At 2 in the morning, Khalid's phone rang. He answered immediately, listened intently, and then smiled for the first time since Emma had met him. It was not a pleasant smile. "They found it," he said to Emma. "The connection. Marcus Ashford and Vanessa Beaumont have been in regular contact for over 2 years, long before I ever met her. Emails, phone calls, encrypted messages, and financial transfers. Marcus has received payments totaling over $3 million from offshore accounts linked to Vera's previous identities." "That's the proof we need," Emma said, her heart racing. "That proves conspiracy to commit fraud." "There's more," Khalid continued. "Marcus Ashford's thesis, the one he published under his own name, the one he stole from you, has been used in several high-profile cases, including cases involving Vera's previous victims. He's been using your work to help her commit fraud for years." Emma felt dizzy. Her stolen thesis, her research, her words had been weaponized to hurt innocent people. Marcus hadn't just destroyed her career. He had turned her work into a tool for criminals. "We have enough to go to the authorities," Khalid said. "We can have Marcus arrested by morning. And we can issue an international warrant for Vera's arrest." "Do it," Emma said. "Please do it." Khalid made the calls. Within an hour, he had mobilized an army of attorneys, investigators, and law enforcement contacts. Emma listened in awe as he orchestrated a coordinated strike against both Marcus and Vera, using his wealth and influence to cut through red tape and bureaucracy. This was what real power looked like, she realized. Not arrogance or cruelty, but the ability to make things happen, to demand justice and have the resources to achieve it. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Khalid ended his final call and turned to Emma. "It's done," he said. "Marcus Ashford will be arrested this morning at his office. Interpol has issued a red notice for Vera Morozova under all her known aliases. Her face will be on every border crossing, every airport, every law enforcement database in the world. She has nowhere to run." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. After 3 years of silence and defeat, justice was finally coming. Not just for Khalid, but for her, for all of Vera's victims, for everyone who had ever been betrayed and told their truth didn't matter. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," Khalid said gently. "Thank you. You saved me, Emma Carter. You saved me from a fate worse than financial loss. You saved me from a life built on lies. I will never forget that." He reached across the desk and took her hand, and Emma felt the warmth of human connection for the first time in years. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer alone. She was seen, valued, and believed, and this, she realized, was only the beginning. The arrest of Marcus Ashford made headlines across New York's legal community. Emma watched the news coverage from Khalid's penthouse, her emotions a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. There was Marcus being led out of Sterling and Whitmore in handcuffs, his face pale with shock, reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. The firm immediately released a statement distancing themselves from him, claiming they had no knowledge of his criminal activities. His clients began abandoning him within hours. "How does it feel?" Khalid asked, standing beside Emma as they watched the television. "Strange," Emma admitted. "I thought I would feel triumphant, but mostly I just feel sad. Sad for who I was when I loved him. Sad for all the time I lost. Sad that it took this long for the truth to come out." "That's because you're a good person," Khalid said. "A vindictive person would celebrate his destruction. You mourn the waste of it all." Over the following days, the investigation expanded. Marcus, facing decades in prison, began cooperating with authorities. He provided detailed information about his partnership with Vera Morozova, including communications, financial records, and information about her network of accomplices. He admitted to stealing Emma's thesis and using it to help Vera identify and exploit wealthy targets. He named other attorneys, document forgers, and financial advisors who had assisted in the frauds. The scandal was enormous. International news outlets picked up the story. Vera's previous victims came forward, Emboldened by the exposure, law enforcement agencies in multiple countries coordinated their efforts. And at the center of it all was Emma Carter, the waitress who had risked everything to speak the truth. Khalid insisted that Emma be credited for her role in exposing the fraud. He gave interviews praising her courage and expertise. He made sure that every news story mentioned that she was the legal researcher whose stolen work had been misused and who had ultimately brought the criminals to justice. Emma's name was cleared. Columbia University reached out to apologize and offer her reinstatement. Law firms that had once ignored her began calling with job offers, but the most important call came from Interpol. Vera Morozova had been apprehended at an airport in Argentina, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country using a forged passport. She was being held pending extradition to the United States to face fraud charges. "They want you to testify," Khalid told Emma. "Your research, your documentation, your testimony will be crucial to the prosecution." "I'll do it," Emma said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she faces justice." "I know you will," Khalid said. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." Emma laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. "I'm not brave. I'm terrified most of the time." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," Khalid said. "It's acting despite the fear. You were trembling when you interrupted my wedding. I saw your hands shaking, but you did it anyway. That's true courage." As the legal proceedings moved forward, Emma and Khalid spent increasing amounts of time together. What had begun as a professional relationship evolved into something deeper. They worked side by side, preparing for the trials, coordinating with attorneys, reviewing evidence. But they also really talked, about their lives, their dreams, their fears, their failures. Khalid told Emma about his childhood in the Emirates, the pressure of being the eldest son, the expectations that had shaped his entire life. He told her about his first marriage, arranged when he was 23, which had ended in divorce after 5 years. He told her about the loneliness of wealth, the difficulty of knowing who to trust, the isolation that came with power. Emma told Khalid about growing up in a small town in upstate New York, the daughter of a teacher and a mechanic. She told him about being the first in her family to attend an Ivy League school, the pride and terror of that achievement. She told him about the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the dreams that had been stolen from her. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both had been betrayed by people they loved. Both had learned that success could be fragile, that reputation could be destroyed in moments. Both had been humbled and were rebuilding themselves from the ruins. One evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, Khalid and Emma sat on his penthouse terrace, watching the sun set over Central Park. The autumn air was cool, and Khalid had draped a cashmere blanket over Emma's shoulders. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people have moved beyond the need to fill every moment with words. "I've been thinking about the future," Khalid said finally. "My future. What I want it to look like, and what do you want?" Emma asked. "I want to build something real," Khalid said. "Not just wealth, not just power, but something meaningful. I want to use my resources to help people who have been wronged, people who don't have the power to fight back on their own. I want to create a foundation that provides legal assistance to victims of fraud, that helps people like you who have been destroyed by those with more power and fewer scruples." Emma turned to look at him, surprised and moved. "That's a beautiful idea, and I want you to run it," Khalid continued. "I want you to be the director. You understand what it's like to be powerless. You understand the legal complexities. You have the expertise and the passion. You would be perfect." "Khalid, Emma didn't know what to say. It was everything she had ever wanted. A chance to practice law again, to help people, to make a difference. But more than that, it was validation. It was someone seeing her worth, her potential, her value. "You don't have to answer now," Khalid said. "Think about it. But know that I'm serious. I want to do this, and I want to do it with you." "Why?" Emma asked. "Why me? You could hire anyone. Someone with more experience, more connections. Someone who hasn't been out of the legal field for 3 years. Because you're the one who stood up when no one else would," Khalid said simply. "Because you risked everything for a stranger. Because you understand what justice really means, not the theoretical kind they teach in law schools, but the real, messy, difficult kind that requires courage and sacrifice." That's why you... Emma felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of joy, of relief, of hope. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll do it. I would be honored to do it. Khalid smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less burdened. Good. Then we'll start planning tomorrow. But tonight, let's just enjoy this moment. Let's celebrate the fact that we survived, that we fought back, that we won. They sat together as the sky darkened and the city lights began to glow. Two people who had been broken and were now healing. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and discovered something neither had been looking for. A true partnership, built on respect, trust, and shared purpose. But their story was not quite finished. There was still one more chapter to write. The trial of Vera Morozova began 6 months later. It was held in federal court in Manhattan, and it attracted international attention. Vera's victims came from around the world to testify. The Swiss banker, the German industrialist, the Monaco developer, the British entrepreneur, all of them told their stories of betrayal and loss. Marcus Ashford testified as part of his plea agreement, detailing the mechanics of the fraud scheme and his role in it, and Emma testified. She took the stand wearing a navy suit that Khalid had insisted on buying her hair pulled back professionally, her voice steady and clear. She explained her research, her documentation, her recognition of Vera at the wedding. She described the pattern of fraud, the sophistication of the scheme, the devastating impact on the victims. Vera's defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was motivated by revenge against Marcus, that her testimony was biased, that her research was incomplete. But Emma held firm. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And she had learned that truth, spoken clearly and backed by facts, was more powerful than any manipulation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Vera Morozova was found guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, money laundering. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to her victims, totaling over $200 million. When the verdict was read, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. It was over. Justice had been served. The woman who had destroyed so many lives would spend the next quarter-century behind bars. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Emma and Khalid. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, questions were shouted from all directions. Khalid handled it with practiced ease, making a brief statement about justice being served and thanking law enforcement for their diligent work. Then he turned to Emma. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Emma, "is a hero. She risked everything to expose a criminal enterprise. She stood up when it would have been easier and safer to stay silent. She is the reason Vera Morozova will never hurt anyone again. And she is the reason I'm standing here today, free from a fraud that would have cost me not just money, but dignity and trust. I owe her everything." Emma blushed at the praise, uncomfortable with the attention, but also proud. She had done something that mattered. She had made a difference. She had reclaimed her voice and her power. That evening, Khalid took Emma to dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the finest restaurants in New York. They sat at a private table overlooking the city, eating food that was more art than sustenance, drinking wine that cost more than Emma used to make in a month. "I have something for you," Khalid said as dessert was being served. He pulled out a small box and slid it across the table. Emma's heart jumped. The box was the wrong size and shape for a ring, but still the gesture felt significant. She opened it carefully and found a key inside, attached to a small card. "What is this?" she asked. "The key to your new office," Khalid said. "The foundation is officially established. The Al-Rashid Foundation for Justice and Legal Aid. We have office space in Midtown, a staff of 12 attorneys and support personnel, and an endowment of $50 million. We'll provide free legal services to victims of fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. We'll help people who can't afford to fight back. And you're the executive director." Emma stared at the key, overwhelmed. "Khalid, this is too much. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Khalid said. "Say you'll help me build something that matters. Say you'll be my partner in this." "Partner," Emma repeated, looking up at him. "Is that all I am?" "Your partner." Khalid's expression grew serious. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Emma, Over the past 6 months, you have become the most important person in my life. You have challenged me, inspired me, and shown me what true integrity looks like. You have made me want to be a better man. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it. Not just as my partner in the foundation, but as my partner in life. If you'll have me. Emma felt her breath catch. This was not a proposal, not exactly, but it was something equally significant. A declaration of intent, a promise of possibility, an invitation to build a future together. I'm not who you were supposed to marry, Emma said softly. I'm not elegant or sophisticated. I'm not from your world. I'm just a girl from upstate New York who served tables for 3 years. You're wrong, Khalid said firmly. You're not just anything. You're brilliant, courageous, and principled. You're the woman who saved my life. You're the woman I admire more than anyone I've ever met. And you're the woman I'm falling in love with. Your background doesn't matter. Your past doesn't matter. What matters is who you are now and who we can be together. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted. I have been for months, but I was afraid to say it. I was afraid you would see me as just the waitress who interrupted your wedding, someone you felt obligated to help. I see you as the woman who had the courage to do what was right when no one else would, Khalid said. I see you as my equal, my partner, and if you'll let me, my love. Emma squeezed his hand. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. The foundation, the partnership, the future. Yes. They left the restaurant hand in hand, stepping out into the New York night. The city glittered around them, full of possibility and promise. They had both been broken, both been betrayed, both been brought to their knees by people who saw them as nothing more than marks to be exploited. But they had survived. They had fought back. They had found each other, and they had won. 1 year later, Emma stood in the offices of the Al-Rashid Foundation for Justice and Legal Aid, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The foundation had helped over 200 people in its first year, providing legal services to victims of fraud who had nowhere else to turn. They had won cases, recovered stolen money, and brought criminals to justice. Emma's team of attorneys was passionate and dedicated, and every day brought new challenges and new victories. Her phone buzzed with a text from Khalid. Rooftop. 5 minutes. Shall I have a surprise? Emma smiled and took the elevator to the building's rooftop terrace. She found Khalid waiting for her, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes warm with affection. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. What's the surprise? Emma asked. This, Khalid said, and dropped to one knee. Emma's hands flew to her mouth as Khalid pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring, the stone catching the sunset light and throwing rainbows across the terrace. Emma Carter, Khalid said, his voice steady, but his eyes shining with emotion. You crashed into my life at the worst possible moment and turned it into the best possible thing. You saved me from a fraud, but more than that, you saved me from a life without real love, real partnership, real meaning. You are my equal in every way. You are my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life. Will you marry me? Emma was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Khalid slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her as the sun set over the city they both loved. When they finally pulled apart, Emma looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had given it to her, and felt a profound sense of rightness. I have a surprise for you too, Emma said. Columbia called today. They want to publish my thesis. The real one under my name. They're also offering me a position as an adjunct professor, teaching a course on fraud prevention and victim advocacy. That's wonderful, Khalid said, beaming with pride. You deserve all of it. You deserve everything. I already have everything, Emma said, looking into his eyes. I have my career back. I have work that matters. I have justice. And I have you. What more could I possibly need? A wedding, Khalid said with a smile. A real one this time. One that actually ends with us married. No interruptions, Emma agreed, laughing. No interruptions, Khalid confirmed. Just you and me making promises we intend to keep, building a life we both believe in. Because you're the one who stood up when no one else would, Khalid said simply. Because you risked everything for a stranger. Because you understand what justice really means, not the theoretical kind they teach in law schools, but the real, messy, difficult kind that requires courage and sacrifice. That's why you... Emma felt tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of joy, of relief, of hope. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll do it. I would be honored to do it. Khalid smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face, making him look younger and less burdened. Good, then we'll start planning tomorrow. But tonight, let's just enjoy this moment. Let's celebrate the fact that we survived, that we fought back, that we won. They sat together as the sky darkened and the city lights began to glow. Two people who had been broken and were now healing. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and discovered something neither had been looking for. A true partnership, built on respect, trust, and shared purpose. But their story was not quite finished. There was still one more chapter to write. The trial of Vera Morozova began 6 months later. It was held in federal court in Manhattan, and it attracted international attention. Vera's victims came from around the world to testify. The Swiss banker, the German industrialist, the Monaco developer, the British entrepreneur, all of them told their stories of betrayal and loss. Marcus Ashford testified as part of his plea agreement, detailing the mechanics of the fraud scheme and his role in it, and Emma testified. She took the stand wearing a navy suit that Khalid had insisted on buying her, her hair pulled back professionally, her voice steady and clear. She explained her research, her documentation, her recognition of Vera at the wedding. She described the pattern of fraud, the sophistication of the scheme, the devastating impact on the victims. Vera's defense attorney tried to discredit her, suggesting she was motivated by revenge against Marcus, that her testimony was biased, that her research was incomplete. But Emma held firm. She had the evidence. She had the truth. And she had learned that truth, spoken clearly and backed by facts, was more powerful than any manipulation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Vera Morozova was found guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, identity theft, money laundering. She was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to her victims, totaling over $200 million. When the verdict was read, Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. It was over. Justice had been served. The woman who had destroyed so many lives would spend the next quarter-century behind bars. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Emma and Khalid. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, questions were shouted from all directions. Khalid handled it with practiced ease, making a brief statement about justice being served and thanking law enforcement for their diligent work. Then he turned to Emma. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Emma, "is a hero. She risked everything to expose a criminal enterprise. She stood up when it would have been easier and safer to stay silent. She is the reason Vera Morozova will never hurt anyone again. And she is the reason I'm standing here today, free from a fraud that would have cost me not just money, but dignity and trust. I owe her everything." Emma blushed at the praise, uncomfortable with the attention, but also proud. She had done something that mattered. She had made a difference. She had reclaimed her voice and her power. That evening, Khalid took Emma to dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the finest restaurants in New York. They sat at a private table overlooking the city, eating food that was more art than sustenance, drinking wine that cost more than Emma used to make in a month. "I have something for you," Khalid said as dessert was being served. He pulled out a small box and slid it across the table. Emma's heart jumped. The box was the wrong size and shape for a ring, but still the gesture felt significant. She opened it carefully and found a key inside, attached to a small card. "What is this?" she asked. "The key to your new office," Khalid said. "The foundation is officially established. The Al-Rashid Foundation for Justice and Legal Aid. We have office space in Midtown, a staff of 12 attorneys and support personnel, and an endowment of $50 million. We'll provide free legal services to victims of fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. We'll help people who can't afford to fight back. And you're the executive director." Emma stared at the key, overwhelmed. "Khalid, this is too much. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," Khalid said. "Say you'll help me build something that matters. Say you'll be my partner in this." "Partner," Emma repeated, looking up at him. "Is that all I am?" "Your partner." Khalid's expression grew serious. He reached across the table and took her hand. Emma, over the past 6 months you have become the most important person in my life. You have challenged me, inspired me, and shown me what true integrity looks like. You have made me want to be a better man. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it. Not just as my partner in the foundation, but as my partner in life. If you'll have me. Emma felt her breath catch. This was not a proposal, not exactly. But it was something equally significant. A declaration of intent, a promise of possibility, an invitation to build a future together. I'm not who you were supposed to marry, Emma said softly. I'm not elegant or sophisticated. I'm not from your world. I'm just a girl from upstate New York who served tables for 3 years. You're wrong, Khalid said firmly. You're not just anything. You're brilliant, courageous, and principled. You're the woman who saved my life. You're the woman I admire more than anyone I've ever met. And you're the woman I'm falling in love with. Your background doesn't matter. Your past doesn't matter. What matters is who you are now and who we can be together. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted. I have been for months, but I was afraid to say it. I was afraid you would see me as just the waitress who interrupted your wedding, someone you felt obligated to help. I see you as the woman who had the courage to do what was right when no one else would, Khalid said. I see you as my equal, my partner, and if you'll let me, my love. Emma squeezed his hand. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. The foundation, the partnership, the future. Yes. They left the restaurant hand in hand, stepping out into the New York night. The city glittered around them, full of possibility and promise. They had both been broken, both been betrayed, both been brought to their knees by people who saw them as nothing more than marks to be exploited. But they had survived. They had fought back. They had found each other, and they had won. 1 year later, Emma stood in the offices of the Al-Rashid Foundation for Justice and Legal Aid, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The foundation had helped over 200 people in its first year, providing legal services to victims of fraud who had nowhere else to turn. They had won cases, recovered stolen money, and brought criminals to justice. Emma's team of attorneys was passionate and dedicated, and every day brought new challenges and new victories. Her phone buzzed with a text from Khalid. Rooftop. 5 minutes. Shall I have a surprise? Emma smiled and took the elevator to the building's rooftop terrace. She found Khalid waiting for her, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes warm with affection. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. What's the surprise? Emma asked. This, Khalid said, and dropped to one knee. Emma's hands flew to her mouth as Khalid pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring, the stone catching the sunset light and throwing rainbows across the terrace. Emma Carter, Khalid said, his voice steady, but his eyes shining with emotion. You crashed into my life at the worst possible moment and turned it into the best possible thing. You saved me from a fraud, but more than that, you saved me from a life without real love, real partnership, real meaning. You are my equal in every way. You are my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life. Will you marry me? Emma was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Khalid slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into his arms and kissing her as the sun set over the city they both loved. When they finally pulled apart, Emma looked at the ring on her finger, then at the man who had given it to her, and felt a profound sense of rightness. I have a surprise for you too, Emma said. Columbia called today. They want to publish my thesis. The real one under my name. They're also offering me a position as an adjunct professor, teaching a course on fraud prevention and victim advocacy. That's wonderful, Khalid said, beaming with pride. You deserve all of it. You deserve everything. I already have everything, Emma said, looking into his eyes. I have my career back. I have work that matters. I have justice. And I have you. What more could I possibly need? A wedding, Khalid said with a smile. A real one this time. One that actually ends with us married. No interruptions, Emma agreed, laughing. No interruptions, Khalid confirmed. Just you and me making promises we intend to keep, building a life we both believe in.